Queen Elizabeth II was the United Kingdom's longest reigning monarch. She was also the world's most recognised, respected and revered follower of horse racing. She was a breeder, an owner and a fan. The Queen loved horse racing and horse racing loved the Queen. My name is Lee Mottershead, and here with me to pay tribute to the Queen in the Racing Post London studios are two of the sport's most acclaimed writers and also two royal racing experts, Brough and Julian Muscat. Brough, if we start with you, viewers won't believe this to look at you, but you do precede the Queen's reign. You were around when this all started, when the Queen took to the throne, when the Queen became involved in horse racing. What are your memories from around that time?
Well, they're very strong because, of course, I was I think 9, 10 when the Queen came to the throne. So actually 9 when she came to the throne, 10 at the coronation, and therefore you remember it very acutely. And you need to remember London, were in the studios in London, which is completely unrecognisable now.
Yeah.
In '52, London was pretty battered. You know, it was, the Barbican was a bomb site. Everything was very grey. We had those terrible smogs. It was a pretty grey place. And when the King died, you know, quite young, it was all very tragic. The Queen was very young. She was young and beautiful, but it was very tragic. Now we've got this awful mourning because, you know, the whole world's grandmothers died, but you know, she's 96, and the Queen was 25. She was young and beautiful, but we already knew she was involved with horses because, you know, we've seen pictures of her. I mean, of course, we were into Pathé News then. Yeah. I mean, nobody saw TV until the coronation. I mean, no one had a TV. Most people never had a TV until the coronation. Never seen it. It's all black and white. But Pathé News would see the Queen at the races, and indeed at the coronation, not the coronation, the actual 52, the ledger that year, Winston Churchill and the Queen were there. Pathé News. You know, it was very. The Queen was around as part of racing already, and I was living in London. Paddington was all pretty battered, but we followed racing. My dad followed racing a bit, and so we had images. We had little, like toy soldiers of little racehorses in the sort of traditional colours. There was Lord Derby, the black, the white cap, and then there was Lord Rosebery, and there was Aga Khan, and the Queen's colours. We knew all them, and Victor Sassoon, and so. You know, she was very much everyone was, in a sense, the royal family were. It's worth remembering. Again, we talk here in the studio in the age of Twitter and everything else. Then there was just had black and white papers, no TV, no one saw anything. And therefore, the possibility of going somewhere where the Queen might be was huge. There's sort of reverence about it, and the idea that the Queen was part of racing was very exciting, and sort of those colours with the gold tassel. And again, my unique, well, situation, but unique privilege. I was a little boy in the rain in '53 on a Tuesday in the Mall because, for various reasons, we somehow got a place on one of those little stands and was waving a flag. And on the Saturday, 4 days later, my parents had a picnic somehow or other up by Tatton Corner. And again, you think of a 10-year-old boy, you're going to have images now, and I'm about to take my grandchildren to Buckingham Palace to walk around St James's Park and see the flowers and try and get into their heads. But I was at Tatton Corner, and everyone knew about Oriel. Oriel was a flashy chestnut with a white star, and we also seen pictures of him. And of course, the Boy Rochford horses all had white noseband. And again, I don't know how we sort of, it's not just you get the images blurred in afterwards, but I did definitely have one image which I didn't get from the TV, which was on Tatton Corner as they kept sort of sweeping around. We were all hoping the Queen would go, but actually Oriel was on the outside, but some way back, but coming forwards. And he ran on and finished second. And of course, what we all thought then was, you know, well, she's bound to win next year or the year after or sometime. And of course we went on year after year after year, and even this year we had reached for the moon we were all hoping for. It didn't work, but it was
also, Brough, in that first year of Oriole, Sir Gordon Richards had never won the race, had he? And there was this huge collective will hoping that one day the greatest jockey would win his derby.
And he'd already been knighted in the coronation. Yes. And of course the great thing about it, he was called the shortest knight. And so she was sort of, or is it rather happy, this picture of her and Duke of Edinburgh, famous picture, looking down, because after all the Queen's not very tall, but she's looking down at Gordon Richards, him absolutely ecstatic because he'd had about 97 tries at the Derby, you know, and had always failed. And it was his last year, and actually his career ended riding a 2-year-old of the Queen's later that year on the eclipse day, and it did the thing that 2-year-old fillies do. They go up and flip, and it landed on top of him, and that finished his career.
Julian, Brough mentions Oriole's Derby. Among the many things you've written about the Queen in the last week and before, because of course she had a superb award-winning book, Her Majesty's Pleasure, about the Queen's
How very kind of you to say so.
No, it's marvellous. One of the stories you've told relates to Oriole's Derby, or more specifically, it relates to the morning of the coronation, which took place.
Yes, well, I mean, a wonderful thing, because obviously, I mean, can you imagine the things that would have been going on in Princess Elizabeth's mind at that time, literally on coronation morning, and yet the news from the Newmarket Gallops that Oriole had really pleased Cecil Boyd Rochford, the trainer, in his last gallop, had to be relayed to the Queen on this of all mornings. It was a detail that was considered too important to keep from her, even though a few hours later the crown was going to be placed on her head. And I think that sums up beautifully the context in which the Queen and racing have intermingled over the years.
And the link from that to last Tuesday, Tuesday before the Queen died, 2 days before her death, when she's got the Prime Minister of Britain and his wife coming up about to be deposed or defrocked, whatever the right word is, Boris Johnson, Carrie Johnson, and following her, Liz Truss and her husband, the two of those coming up, with quite a big bit of headspace, we've got to deal with those two. That morning, she made a point of returning a call, which she didn't need to Clive Cox, the trainer, who's one of her smaller trainers. He's only got 3 horses of hers, and he had a little 2-year-old filly running at Goodwood in a nursery, and not a very important race. And she spoke to him, Clive told me, for about 5 minutes about the filly, about what might happen at Goodwood, about another horse that he had in the stable, which would be, she's got 43, 45 horses in training, and about something else. And his words to me were, she was sharp as a tack. So, you know, from the coronation day to Tuesday, racing was absolutely part of it. And I believe it's something that actually was her great escape, and Julian's obviously studied it in this lovely book. Great escape because, and actually, I've got a sister of 96. I believe that racing's not too presumptuous. I think it actually helped her because, you know, when you've all been round trainers, it's a sort of Pelmanism going through this horse, what slept by there. It goes through, because a lot of people get older, your mind goes woolly. Unless you keep doing mental press-ups, you know, you don't sort of care. You can't really remember where you are, let alone, you know, 97 racehorses. Yeah. So it's been a wonderful connection, but I hope it was also quite good for the Queen.
And on that same tack, you know, the Royal Studs weren't really producing very much in these sort of early years of the new millennium, and yet, aged 85, the Queen and her racing and bloodstock advisor John Warren sat down to reinvigorate the Royal Broodmare Band. As you say, Brough, I mean, the attention to detail starts to give way, but in her case, not in this case, as it were, because she, you know, to back up your story about Clive Cox, you know, she wanted the Studs to succeed, and she made a number of quite attractive acquisitions to join the Broodmare Band at a time when almost everybody else would actually be scaling back, wouldn't they? Think, well, I'm not probably going to be here that much longer. There's no point in having 35 mares anymore.
They won't buy a new suit in the 70s. And there she is. I mean, I think the Queen we're talking, we're not meaning to be flippant, we're talking the racing contest. I mean, she has what has to be, will remain, a unique double, because she was also a rider. She rode when she was 6, when she was 96. In 1954, she won a group Group 1 race, major race, the King George VI Queen Elizabeth Ascot with Oriel. And whatever it is, 69 years later, she won that Ascot Gold Cup with Estimate. I mean, to have that distance.
There was 73 years between her first Royal Ascot winner and her last one.
Absolutely impossible to think of.
We shouldn't forget as well, should we, that although when Estimate won that Gold Cup, she was bridging an awfully long gap between Group 1 winners for the Queen. But just as Brough paints that picture of a London and a Britain that was very different in the early 1950s, so too was horse racing. And we shouldn't forget that in the early 1950s, the Queen was a far more significant and bigger racehorse owner relative to others in the sport than she was in later life. She was twice champion owner in the 1950s. Yes. She was a big deal then.
She was. Well, in those days, as you say, Lee, and you'll remember, Brough, very few people had more than 40 horses in training.
I wouldn't have thought anybody, frankly.
Yeah,
you're
40
right.
was the Aga Khan's size of string, I think, around that time, and he was probably the biggest. And so, she was literally, as you say, right up there, both in terms of numbers and quality. Very different now, of course, with the Middle Eastern influx. And we've, let's not forget, we've lost, Brough, almost every owner-breeder of the old school that were running around in the Queen's era with 20 and 30 horses. They're just not there anymore. So that in itself, for her, to still be relevant and still having the odd big winner is quite something.
Again, it's tricky for some of my vintage not to get a bit down looking back all the time, but I mean, I was first at the St Leger in 1956, and the Queen's horse, I felt, was 5th. It's actually won by a French horse, Cambremer, owned by a French magnate. But the other horses, they were owned by either aristocracy or magnates. And on Saturday, the first 4 in the betting were all owned by Gulf interests. In 1956, I mean, the Abu Dhabi and Dubai were the crucial states. I mean, no one virtually ever heard of them, sort of thing.
They haven't existed for very long.
Completely, they didn't. I mean, Dubai and Abu Dhabi didn't exist as independent companies. They didn't exist, and it's completely different. And in lots of ways, everyone keeps saying, well, it's much better. I mean, everything's much. I mean, looking at gold, my memory, which I actually looked at the Pathé News to make sure it was right. My memory of going that first time was, you got into the stand, you looked across, it was completely packed out. So what's not good is the crowds. The crowds were completely solid, but it was sort of brown, because you looked down, it was just a sea of brown, because it was all flat caps.
Yeah.
Because it was a miner's day out. And if you went to Greyhound, it would be packed out, Speedway packed out. Because again, people had been through the war, and sort of gatherings. I remember homes weren't warm. So actually going to gather with people was a great thing to do. You couldn't sit at home and watch telly, because there wasn't any telly. You couldn't do, a lot of homes were pretty uncomfortable, frankly, and so getting out amongst people was a great thing. And at that stage, people, remember, the racehorse was still much closer to being a very glamorous thing. Young people could, way out of the sort of ghetto was to become a jockey if you were a small guy in Liverpool and all that sort of stuff. But all that's gone. So racing's trying to reboot itself, and it's particularly flat racing has got itself in a slight muddle, because of course it's got itself rebooted by the Gulf interests, but they've become so big that no one else can play. And it's going to, it's just another issue for another day, but it's a big issue, and the Queen, to stay, as Julie says, relevant, has been amazing. And she's actually got more horses now. The Rolls has more horses and been more successful numerically than she's ever been, certainly than when she was winning in 55 and 57.
Well, numerically, that's right, isn't it? I mean, last year, 2021, was her most successful ever year on on British racecourses. How has that come about, Julian? What's the reason behind that revival in recent years?
Well, it goes back to what I was talking about just earlier on. Her enthusiasm is such that the Royal Studs, in terms of the number of mares, is probably bigger than it's ever been.
Yeah.
You know, she just, you know, remains as besotted by the game as she was when she was a teenager. And because, of course, when you have more mares, they're breeding more horses for you every year. But the standard of a horse, the quality of horse that she's breeding now, is considerably superior to what she was breeding 15 years ago, 20 years ago. The royal bloodlines now are really diverse. She's bought fillies from wonderful old families, long established classic families. And one of these days, sadly, she's not going to be here to see it, but those stars are going to throw up a really, really top-class horse.
And to what extent do you think her hand has been all over that in terms of buying those fillies and those mares and orchestrating this revival?
Well, there's no question that she would have had a big input into which mare was brought into the Royal Studs herself. She's really up to speed on all the Aga Khan's families. You remember he gave her 6 fillies, one of which was estimate.
Yeah.
She's got those fillies in the stud. There are mares that trace back to Arkang, the wonderful Wildenstein family of the Ark winner.
Yeah.
And yes, I mean, this would be largely her input. If she says we could do with another 3 or 4 mares, that's how the number would grow. I don't think it would work the other way around, where her advisors might say, "Ma'am, would you like to increase your broodmare band?" I think she would probably decide that by being so keen. And so, we are seeing more winners. And it's only a matter of time before the bloodlines in there now start throwing. She might have sort of 3 or 4 individual group winners a year a few years down the line from that. It wouldn't surprise me at all, even with the big Middle Eastern influence,
And Brough, that success that we're hoping that the Royal Silks will have it in the coming years, based on those decisions that the Queen was making, all comes down to the fact that her knowledge of horse racing and breeding racehorses was huge, but her knowledge of horses was huge, her understanding of horses, her empathy with horses.
Yes, when I was saying unique double, I mean, the double really is that not only from Oriel to estimate, but the same person who had that, I mean, there might conceivably be somebody who had, or Group 1 was that far apart, but there wouldn't ever have been, ever will be, someone who did that and rode enthusiastically when she was 6 and 96. She was riding this year. This year. And rode quite a lot last year. She was riding up in Balmoral. She wasn't riding in Balmoral this year, but she was certainly riding apparently in the school once or twice this year in Windsor. But she was fascinated by horses and loved the idea of the thoroughbred. But I mean, and she knew them. I mean, I was with John Gosden yesterday, and he was saying you had to be on your mettle when you spoke to her, because she asked you a question. She'd ask you questions that were right on the button. And other trainers I've talked to, and there's a good story which I won't mention the trainer because he's sort of slightly shy about it, but it's extremely apposite to her understanding of horses and of her horses. Don't forget, as Julie said, she's got plenty of them, and when you're only able to go round the stable probably twice a year, you're not going to see them that often, but you're going to remember them from when they were foals, and in her case, and yearlings and things at the Royal Studs. But still, I mean, it's one horse is a bit like the other, we all know. And this particular horse, quite good horse, he had, the Queen is making her annual visit the next day. So the yard is all scrubbed, everybody's had it cleaning and getting their sort of clothes pressed and teeth cleaned and goodness knows what, and brass things all rubbed. And in the evening, they're getting ready for the next day. This particular horse comes out. It's got a big knee for some reason. What on earth happened to that? There's nothing wrong with it. Big knee. Panic. So they hose it down and they walk it round and they get the vet, they give it an injection and they get it down. And they go all night, all around, and the next morning, the trainer tells me, I talked to you really last week, it's okay. They couldn't really tell at all. Anyway, you can see what's going to happen. So he brings the horses out, and there they are. She's enjoyed, yes, the rest of it. Actually, she had Prince Harry with her, but nonetheless, I don't think Prince Harry actually knew exactly what was going on, but anyway, she was watching. Anyway, this good horse comes out, and she says, "What's wrong with me?" I mean, she wouldn't have seen that horse for 6 months anyway, and he's been in training for 2 years, so she wouldn't have seen it that much. But she'd have known from a foal, but she got one of those photographic memories, and also she liked them.
Yeah.
She understood them as sort of personalities. She actually liked them. She knew them like she knew her dogs. They weren't just another. Plenty of people, I have to tell you, Julian knows as well. You know, they have quite a lot of horses, but they don't actually know them very well. They're not horsemen. They didn't ride when they were 96. They wouldn't ever ride when they were 6. They didn't ride when they were 6 either. But she actually understood them, and she enjoyed, which I think is a very important point for her own longevity and everything else, is that she enjoyed her time with horses and with people around horses in a way more than she enjoyed anything else, perhaps beyond her family. You see her, you've seen her yourself in the race course, she's sort of at ease. And the people within the bubble are at ease with her because they know that she knows. You know, I wrote something for the time. You know, we knew that she loved what we loved, which makes us all feel, you know, the whole world is feeling they've lost someone and someone sort of almost close to them. But racing, I think it can honestly claim to be particularly acute because she was a part of our little world, our little strange, you know, quite small world. She actually was part of it, you know. And
she must have adhered to the old racing adage that all are equal on the turf, didn't she? Because
on the turf and under it.
Yes, yes. Well, I thought it appropriate to shorten that sentence from the circumstances.
Yes, Julian,
today, but no, she loved being in their company, didn't she, Brough?
Yeah, you can see her again. You know, even my last memory of her was at Royal Ascot. I suppose it was last year. Was she there last year? I think she did come.
For one day on the Saturday.
Yeah, she came there. She had 2 runners. I think it was the Cheshire. I forget what the race was. And they had a special little sort of. She had that downstairs room, and she came and stood by the rail. And they brought the horses up a sort of chute. 2 horses she had. There were 2 runners, and they were trained by Haggis and Gosden. Now those are both 6-footers. Gosden's about 8 foot, but I mean they're both 6-footers. And the jockeys were Frankie Dettori and Tom Marquand, who were about the same size as the Queen. And so there was this sort of conversation, so there were 5 heads in the conversation. And you know, you've all seen, conversations with jockey and trainer and paddock, and I think it's all quite sort of formal. This was just an obviously informed but informal conversation of people sort of, I can remember we were all in Pento, pleased to be there, pleased to be having racing, excited by it. Okay, the Queen was 95, but she was so obviously part of that.
It's the demeanour that's the key. If you're around the Queen, if you're taking her to the races or greeting her at the races or wherever you are, if she's in good form, then all the people around her will be smiling and laughing and joking, wouldn't they? If something had gone wrong, then people's demeanour would be very different, those around her. We saw at the races all the time, it was almost like a sort of jolly get-together, wasn't it? Everyone was smiling and having fun, and she would have been the litmus for all of that by the fact that she was having fun and enjoying her day out. Everybody else, everybody's mood was sort of almost governed by hers, and that's all we ever saw, wasn't it, Lee?
In terms, absolutely.
Jollity.
In terms of demeanour, you painted a beautiful picture in the book of royal visits to Richard Hannon Sr.'s yard, and you'd have loved to have been a fly on the wall. And when you read the book, it feels like you were a fly on the wall. She particularly enjoyed those, didn't she?
Yes, and because Richard Hannon Sr. can't help but being insouciant. You know, and it doesn't matter the company that he's in; he's not going to change. And she used to love those visits because he would treat her as a normal, regular visitor to the yard, as if she was any other owner. I dare say he might have toned down his language when he remembered. But in the main, I think that's what she loved.
Tell us a story about the lad who couldn't understand what Richard was telling us.
Yeah, okay, well, yes, I mean, one of the lads riding one of her horses was late in for work on this particular morning when the Queen was there, and so he rushed, tacked up his horse. It wasn't part of the Queen's troop of horses, but he'd made his way up onto the hill to try and find where he should be going, and Richard Hannon was sitting in the front of his car pointing in that direction. They were there. And of course, without really being able to understand him, because he didn't speak any English, he was Indian, the chap just sort of rode his horse up to the first group of horses that he saw, and they were the Queen's horses. And Richard Hannon in the car was sort of shouting and saying, no, you're going to the wrong place. And in exasperation, he turned round to the Queen and said, "Ma'am, do you speak any Indian?" And she said, "Well, I'm afraid I don't know." And he said, "Well, you ought to. You ruled the place for long enough." And that was him, wasn't it? And that's what she enjoyed.
Wasn't the line where she loved going down there because it was the only place she went to that didn't smell of fresh paint?
Yes, yes. They were, yes. Richard Hannon, was not going to paint his city room just because the Queen happened to be coming. And I think, again, the relaxed mood around the place, Brough, on her visits to Hannon. I mean, all the people who were with her used to enjoy that particular stable visit because they knew that the Queen would have fun with Richard Hannon.
When you traced the Queen's racing fortunes over those many decades, are there singular moments that you could say that was the peak of the Queen's racing fortunes, but also what was the most difficult time for her as a racehorse owner and breeder?
Well, I don't think we can doubt what the most difficult time was. It was the time when Major Dick Hearn had Nashwan, who was out of a mare height of fashion that she had sold to Sheikh Hamdan. There were many strands to that story, and all of them were particularly taut for her. It was an unhappy time. So, I think that probably sits alone, Brough, as the trough.
Oh, no, and again, it's worth saying, because with one of those situations where the Queen's policy, which is triumphantly correct in hindsight over the years, of not getting drawn into making public comment, just absolutely not. Those who weren't around for the story some time ago now, whenever Nashwan was, when was Nashwan?
89.
89. Yeah. Dick Hearn had a heart attack. Dick Hearn was at West Ilsley, which the Queen owned. And the Queen owned it because they sold Height of Fashion for 1.2 million, which was considered an unbelievable amount of money. And with it, she bought West Ilsley stable, so she actually owned a racing stable. She already had, Julian will correct me the numbers, but she already had a full sister or half sister to Height of Fashion and the mare too. So they thought they were fully covered for that. And history relates that actually top brood mares are often not, they're not as good at reproducing as
the dam.
High Cliff the Dam had been the Queen. But
yes, I mean, it was such a sad story in so many ways.
She sold it, and then Dick Hearn had a heart attack, and with the best will in the world, they thought, well, he's not going to be able to carry on, so it's not fair. We must appoint someone else to take over the stables, which they did with William Huntingdon. And Dick Hearn said, look, that's, sorry. So, and then Dick Hearn actually made an unbelievable recovery, even though he was in a wheelchair. And the decision wasn't rescinded. Now, there was many, Julian says, strands to the story, but the Queen didn't ever comment, but people took very much against Lord Portchester in particular, but also the Queen. And then Nashwan, to prove that Dick Hearn wasn't disabled, became the best horse for, a generation. And I promise you, when he won the Guineas, because I was doing the telly, and the horse came back into the unsaddling enclosure, the applause was very strong for Dick, but it was also with a feeling, of, almost sort of Republican feeling. So why did the Queen do this? And it was very, it was people were very quite upset. And if you remember at that time also, the Queen Mother was still on her merry way into her sort of 90s and things. The Queen was seen as a rather sort of stiff person compared to the Queen Mother. The Queen Mother was the nation's granny. and the great-grandmother and figure. And it's only really, I think, fully in the last 20 years that everyone's fully appreciated quite what a wonderful, unique person the Queen is. And so, in many ways, these last 20 years have almost been some of the best. And, you know, for King Charles, all his... The movement towards him moving on has been so beautifully managed, which it wouldn't have been as easy 20 years ago.
And within those last 20 years, Julian, when the Queen's fortunes have improved again, would you say that Estimate's Gold Cup represents the greatest highlight in her racing life?
I think we have to take our cue from what she actually said that afternoon at Ascot. Because we had all assumed, and she had actually said when she was very young, that the highlight for her would be to win the Derby. But after Estimate won the Gold Cup, she then told Sir Michael Stout, her trainer, that the Gold Cup at Ascot was the one race she wanted to win above all others. So therefore, it has to be the highlight, doesn't it? By her own take on things.
I mean, again,
a wonderful day. I mean, you know,
those pictures.
The atmosphere around that winner's circle was extraordinary, wasn't it? And you don't normally see the steppings. There's room for 10,000 people around that winner's enclosure, and there were no gaps at all. Sometimes at Royal Ascot, even for the big races, it's not even half full. But on this particular day, it was almost like a night at the proms. You know, it was packed.
We talked about the highlights of the Queen. One of the highlights for you must have been 1977, actually being invited to a party thrown by the Queen.
Yeah, I'm still slightly scratching my head to remember quite why I was there, because it wasn't there's no question of a press reception. There was hardly any other press thing was there. I had done a film or something about it, but it was Dunfermline was the
Oaks and St Ledger.
Oaks and St Ledger, and sadly, and I was actually the anchor for Channel 4, was it ITV?
ITV.
Still ITV then, but for various reasons, the Queen wasn't at either the Oaks or the St Ledger, which is really sad, because we would have had those pictures. Some great pictures of her when Highclere won the French Derby. There's if you ever see those pictures, French Prix d'Anne, they're absolutely lovely pictures. But anyway, she had a reception, but it was for her racing team, Dick Hearn, the trainer, and Willie Carson, but also all the lads and her people from Sandringham and everything else. And again, it was quite, I've been to one or two other of those sort of things at the Palace, and they're quite formal. You're in a sort of row, and then the Queen comes round and sort of meets you and you bow and sort of stuff, as you do with other formal things like that. And this was, the Queen was just mingling, but she knew them, and they knew that she knew them, so it wasn't as if, but they were sort of introducing their wives and things. I say they, but you've got this lovely image of, these are guys who don't normally wear a suit, and they've got this sort of one red suit, perhaps doesn't quite fit, and they don't normally wear a collar and tie, so they've got, it doesn't quite do up, and the hands are, a proper workman's hands, whereas the people in the palace, you normally get, they've got white hands and soft hands, and they've got sort of great thick wrists and things, and they're all there, and the Queen's moving around them, completely familiar, and they're at ease with her. And when I came up to talk to her, she kindly talked to me, I think is the right phrase to say. I remember it not being difficult. And the exchange I remember so strongly that I couldn't have made it up, because this time, that range, you had to be suspicious of all your memories, but it's a Dick Hearn was obviously the trainer. I said, which is a perfectly reasonable thing to say really, so what about the 2-year-old man? And her answer to me was, well, I'm not sure that much good, but she said, but you know what Dick's like? He never tells you anything. and sort of laughed. And it was a lovely, because it was engaging, because she knew as I knew what Dick was like, and also sort of teasing that he sort of was always going to be quite guarded about this and that, and that of course he was, as Dunfermline has demonstrated, a master of his profession, and it was again, that relationship with the Queen is the one moment I have been with her when I could see what the trainers and people at the studs say when they say how. I was at Sandringham once and doing something with Michael Oswald, and we were looking at some horse or whatever, and then the Queen just sort of came round corner with them, and sort of said hello and was walking past me. It was just completely ordinary. You know, there weren't lots of people around or anything like that. You know, but I have one other lovely memory of Sandringham, which I think explains the Queen's closeness to things. I was staying for some reason with Michael Oswald, and that night after dinner, there was a call and there was a mare foaling, as they often do at night, well, usually at night. So it's 10:30 or something. We go in and the mare foals, and as you know, it's a particularly in a really nice stable. It's a sort of great nativity scene. You know, the little foal arrives, it's sort of wet and sort of bundle of sort of sack with tripod really, or a quadruped, it's called 4, 6, and then it struggles around and it gets up within 2 or 3 minutes really, and then sort of staggers down again and gets up, and the mare licks it, and then it's up and shaking itself and walks around a bit because that's what it does in the herd. Anyway, when it was all right and everything else, we went round and we went literally sort of just next door where there was a little office, and Michael Oswald dialed a number and he was put straight through. And then there was a conversation which I was hearing one side of it, but it was so obviously one of somebody engaged the other end. Yes, no, he's fine. No, not a white star like so and so. No, but quite a bit of her head. And that those sort of things, which is 100% someone involved with the families, not just everything's okay, and sort of trite things like that. It was much more. No, fine. And actually walking around, and then no, I think we'll probably won't put it out till tomorrow afternoon or something. It was a conversation which is completely involved two ways. And I remember thinking, and the Queen would have had 20, 30 of those that year, but she was that involved. And and that's what was very special to her, and that's what I find very special to us, knowing that she liked that so much.
And that being the case, Julian, and just finally now, we don't know what's going to happen in the future, what the royal racing succession will quite look like. But for all that we know, we've been blessed to have the Queen as racing's patron. Do you think we'll look back in the future and think we didn't realise just how blessed we were?
I think that's likely, Lee, certainly. I mean, Brough hit the nail on the head, and in fact, you were talking about it with me earlier on. As the years have passed, the Queen's role and sort of involvement in racing has become sort of more and more pronounced in the public eye, as it were. But I still don't think we're quite ready for what may come. I mean, Royal Ascot has thrived on her being there every day, riding the liege carriage. Everybody knew that was going to happen. And I think personally, from when you watch people watching the procession, I'm pretty sure that a lot of people used to go to Royal Ascot just for that. I mean, if you're standing by the rail around that paddock, the winner's enclosure area, you could literally pick your spot and you would be 5 yards away from where she got out of the Landau carriage. I think this aspect of it is what we're really going to miss. I think Royal Ascot has evolved extremely well over the last 20 years or so. It's not as it used to be, but I think it's for the better. And I think people genuinely know that they're going to have a good day if they go there, irrespective, as it were, of the royal presence. So that there's a chance that the way Ascot has evolved will keep it as one of the sort of glittering summer occasions. But I think there's definitely going to be a fallout from this. I think it's, the sold out signs may not be posted as frequently as they have done. And I think also racing status generally within the sort of the domain of British life, I think that's probably going to take a little bit of a knock as well.
Julian Muscat, Brough Scott, thank you so much. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.